Okay, thank you, Emer, and thanks everybody for coming back after lunch. So I'm talking about the topic that Emer has addressed under the topic of supporting our farm family suppliers addressing sustainability. So my role, I'm a sustainability practitioner. My job is to take the science and the research that you've discussed today and to develop practical programs and schemes at farm level in order to make that difference and to help our suppliers on their sustainability journey. There is a question that a number of people have asked, look, who's Tirlán? And it's a fair question because we're only a year old, but we have 100 years of heritage behind us, so maybe just to talk to you for one moment. So Tirlán is Ireland's largest dairy cooperative. Back on the 17th of December 2021, our farmer owners who owned 60% of the co-op at that stage approached Glanbia plc, who owned the other 40%, and said, we would like to take control of our future. We would like to be a 100% cooperative, and they approached the PLC, and since the 1st of August last year, Tirlán Cooperative is a 100% farmer-owned cooperative, so we're just over 12 months old. In terms of some of our numbers, we're the Ireland's largest dairy cooperative, not often remembered, but we're the largest purchaser of native Irish grains as well. We have a retail branch network of 52 branches across predominantly the southeast, from Louth across Kildare down to North Cork and across to Wexford. We have 11 high-tech processing facilities that we'll have a look at in a minute. And there's 2,300 employees, colleagues of mine, working predominantly in Ireland but also internationally. And in terms of our farmer owners, we have 11,000 farmer shareholders, farm family members who are our owners within Tirlán Co-op. So in terms of the engine behind Tirlán is really the 5,000 milk suppliers and the 1,500 grain farmers who get up every day. And I often say they're the ones with the stone and the shoe. They're the real sustainability practitioners who take the programs and schemes we dream up and devise and really bring them to life and make them happen. But they're the engine that produced this premium product that's then processed into the Avonmore, Kilmeaden brands and the outstanding products that are produced right up from Lough Agish right down as far as Wexford. So look, that's maybe a quick hello from Tirlán. I thought in the context of thinking about how we're using science and research to inform sustainability action at farm level, it might be just worth for a moment to stand back and take a view regarding, so what's the agri-environmental policy landscape a farmer faces today? And for me, I think the December 2019 statement of intent by European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen of stepping out of the European Green Deal was really a flagship moment in this whole space. I think at the time she described it as Europe's man on the moon moment in terms of reconciling Europe's economy with the planetary boundaries. So that was 2019. Fast forward the past couple of years, we now have our sectoral targets in place with our climate action plan. Ireland now is the second most ambitious climate legislation in the world, going beyond our European obligations. And still, the purpose of this conference today, we still have to settle on our land use targets, so to speak, the one that's outstanding. In most recent months, we have the outcome and the outturn of the most recent review of the nitrates regulations. And also then, alongside that, the deliberations of the Citizens' Assembly on Biodiversity has made the headlines, and farmers are wondering, what does all that practically mean in terms of what additional changes will be taking place at farm level? And that's before we move into the nature restoration regulations going through the European Union right now. So that change piece and change being constant, it does create concern at farm level. And I asked myself, how am I going to empirically catch this concern in some sort of a structured way? And I leaned into some research which was commissioned by the HSE and carried out by the School of Psychology and the School of Agriculture in UCD. And it was titled Developing a Suicide Prevention Intervention for Farmers in Ireland. And I think, mental health was referred to in an earlier session. And so as part of this research, there was a question asked which ties in nicely with some wording that Laura used at the very beginning. So the question that was asked in that research was, what word would you use to describe your attachment or relationship with the farm? And look at predominant words that came through: strong, good, love, connected, committed. Do I see family there, or home? You get this real strong sense of place amongst the farming community with their farm, and in that context, I think in the context of the discussion we're having here today around land use change, this connectivity with the land, it's not just Moriad, a field. It's real and it's tangible, and it's borne out by independent research. But the reason I put in this concern at farm level is other data that came through that research. When farmers were asked in this research, rate how much stress 30 farming-specific stressors cause them on a scale of 1 being no stress and 4 being very stressful. The top 3 stressors that they had, the first one being government policies designated to reduce climate change. The second one, outsiders not understanding farming. And the third one, concern over the future of the farm. So as we all step out in and think about all that we've heard today and how it might be addressed, keep an eye on the constituency that you're stepping into, because these are the real concerns they're telling us in terms of independent research. And sometimes that concern is misunderstood. And I can say without fear of contradiction, it doesn't equal denial, because sometimes that concern is misunderstood as denial. And for me, I use proof points around that in terms of when I look at the great work coming through the Food Vision 2030 group, and some of you will recognise yourselves here. Many will say, perhaps in this audience, that it wasn't enough and it didn't go far enough. But the fact that so many stakeholders right across society came together collaboratively to challenge each other and say we are in a climate of biodiversity emergency, we do need to chart a way forward and we need to do it together. I signpost the work of the Food Vision group, and I commend the work of Tom Arnold specifically around bringing the sector together to arrive at an outcome. Coming back to ourselves in Tirlawn, leaning into programmes that I'll speak about in a few minutes around things like our Sustainable Farming Academy, our Sustainability Action Payment, our involvement in the ASSET programme. And indeed, we're proud to have achieved gold membership of the Origin Green programme, which is these stretch objectives. That's only achieved because of the work principally being done by our farmer suppliers and members at ground level. So coming back to and speaking for a moment very much around supporting our farm family sustainability journey, what are we doing within Tirlawn? And we're very much focused on 3 pillars. The first one is the area of advisory. The second is the area of knowledge, building sustainability knowledge capacity. And the third one then is sustainability finance or sustainability payments. Look how we're using financing, to drive sustainability action at farm level. And we'll speak about these in a bit of detail. I've spoken about the ASSET programme, and I just have one slide on this. So for me, this is a really good example of collaborative coming together of the sector to move beyond what the regulatory requirements are as a means of trying to change in a positive way. So just to start back very much, what is ASSET? The ASSET is an acronym for the Agricultural Sustainability Support Advisory Programme. It's a sector-wide collaboration, a collaborative approach focused on addressing water quality challenges. In terms of how we do what we do, it's really science guiding Tirlawn's actions. In that LawPro, who are the Local Authority Water Programmes Office, and the Environmental Protection Agency conduct scientific analysis of water quality challenges and provide co-ops and chagas, including ourselves, our ASSET advisors, with an evidence-based approach to pressures identified in what's called priority areas for action. And our ASSET team within Tirlawn put in place on-farm water quality remediation plans using this LawPro EPA data. So in summary, what does all that really mean? When our ASSET advisors are out trying to affect change in a positive way when it comes to water quality, they're having a really detailed, informed discussion with our farm family suppliers. So they're able to go out and they're able to say, we're here because there's a nitrates challenge, or there's a phosphorus challenge. We're here because here's what the PIP map says, and we'll talk about the PIP map in a moment. Again, here at the bottom left, the level of data and detail that's focused around the delivery of this programme is perhaps best demonstrated by this nitrates pollution impact potential map. And we won't go through it all in detail, but you can see how from left to right. There's a funneling of the knowledge, there's a funneling of the data that's available to allow for the most informed discussion by the time they come out on farm. Recognising there's data here from the Department of Agriculture, from Teagasc, from GSI, from EPA. All of a sudden you get a sense of how really well informed action is taking place at ground level. And that then leads to the sustainability advisors. And in our case in Tirlawn, many of our sustainability advisors going out on farm, having a discussion around targeted measures for, let's say in this case, nitrogen losses, around how they're applying slurry, use of fertiliser. So very much an example of how science is being used to have a very targeted and structured engagement. The next piece I just want to touch on is building sustainability knowledge capacity. In truth, when it comes to sustainability advisory at farm level, it's in transition. In that many of our farmers, when they were going to Ag College, when they were completing their Green Cert, it was productivity, it was about performance, it was about managing every blade of grass, it was about perennial ryegrass, it was about draining the land. Today that's heresy, you'll tell me. And that's the dynamic and the environment within which the agri-environmental landscape has changed. And recognising that as their co-op, we have two options. We can either be a spectator and say it's Teagasc's role, or we can step in a very constructive way. And one of the measures we've done here in the middle, we've aligned with one of our key customers, Bailey's. So Tirlawn is the sole supplier of cream to Bailey's, so feel free as you're drinking your Bailey's to know you're supporting Irish jobs. But we aligned with them and we said, let's do something really positive and constructive. And we launched our Sustainable Farming Academy. And the Sustainable Farming Academy, each year, for the next 3 years, we're providing 20 fully funded diploma places, level 7 diploma, environment, climate and sustainability in partnership with UCC, for farm family members, for our suppliers who want to start their studies. We're now in year 2, and our first cohort of participants, undergraduates, will graduate, all going well, in October. And it's been I've been on that journey with them, and it's a really empowering journey. Indeed, one of the lecturers is here, Mark from UCC, so but to the point around the value of the discussion amongst those 20 participants, and UCC are very clever, they bring in others who are involved in other courses, and just the dynamic and the energy around the urgency for change, but also speaking up and speaking out around the actions that they're also taking. But I use that as an example of how we all have a role, and maybe how Tirlawn ourselves are stepping into this, building this sustainability knowledge capacity. The next one I just want to touch on here is our Future Farm Programme partnership with Teagasc. And again, what's really good, look, first of all, maybe I'll mention really what it's about, and then maybe talk about how it's aligned with maybe some of the work that Dr. Rachel Murphy referred to previously. So the Signpost Future Farm Programme, it's a partnership with Teagasc. It's running out until 2025 with specific objectives in the areas of, there's about 17 key objectives, but for the purpose of today, I'm really just focusing in on greenhouse gas emissions, ammonia, nutrient use efficiency, but also profitability. A former colleague of mine once said it's hard to be green when you're in the red, but just the importance of economic sustainability to drive environmental performance. Someone has to pay for all this, and sometimes that's a challenge when you're engaging with the customer. Each of the farmers participating in this Future Farm Programme have a bespoke farm sustainability plan prepared on their farm, which sets benchmarks them against their starting point. Other signpost farmers, not nationally, and there's over 100 involved, and there's targets set for the farm, and it's available at the end of each year. Rachel referred and did a really detailed comprehensive presentation on NASCO earlier on, the National Agricultural Soil Carbon Observatory. Each of our farmers participating in this programme are members of NASCO. And that's why we're really interested in how quickly can you move from your 25, 30 centimetre soil carbon analysis to go deeper, to go further, to understand what's happening. And look, the LiDAR analysis above carbon stocks are also taking place. And there's the flux towers that Mary Frances referred to earlier also are part of this programme. Biodiversity and water quality is also part of the programme. And these farmers who are participating, Tirlawn, we don't own farms. These are farmers who are putting their hand up and saying, we want to be opinion leaders. We want to be involved in knowledge transfer and knowledge exchange within our communities. And so we ask these farmers to host farm walks and are really engaging, because farmers are going to listen to each other. The final piece I'm just touching on here in terms of driving on and delivering on sustainability at farm level is sustainability finance. And this is the program we've built around this is what we call our sustainability action payment. So what we launched a voluntary sustainability action payment, which results in our milk suppliers achieving a milk price payment for delivering specific sustainability actions. So in a comprehensive way, we've stepped into the milk pricing structure and we've added sustainability as part of the metric. Under this initiative, 18 sustainability options are available, from which our suppliers are requested to declare up to 7 options that they'll action on their farm on their individual farms. And I think that's important. I don't know, was it a minister or someone earlier on spoke about farmers knowing their land best and as a means of behavioural change. We're not prescribing the 7 that must be delivered. We're saying here's the 18. And the reason we've landed on these 18 is that the sustainability options are closely aligned with the key environmental actions identified in Teagasc's climate and ammonia marginal abatement cost curve. So what we've done is we've taken the science, we've taken the 34 measures within the MAC, and we've said we need to right-size them for grass-based outdoor dairying in the southeast, and we've landed on 18. And if we follow through that the science is right, and we take these measures, and we're saying to our farmers, you know your farm best, you take the 7. As part of the sustainability programme, there's an annual investment of 18 million euros. So Tirlán has designated a fund of 18 million euros, which is the equivalent to half a cent a litre, being paid to all our suppliers who participate in the programme. This represents a potential average payment of about 3,000 euros to a Tirlán supplier. The programme began in January of last year as part of a 3-year programme, during which a full review is taking place next year, and the success of the programme, as you can imagine, is being monitored by our board. In recognition of farmers' current on-farm sustainability actions, look, for the first year, and just in terms of the journey and the behavioural change piece, all our suppliers received the unconditional half cent in year 1. But that also allowed them to take action in terms of receiving the payment in 2023. From this year, the sustainability payment is based on delivery of 7 options. And importantly, when we got sign-off on this from our board, we got approval that over the duration of the programme, the menu of options can be extended to provide an increased range of choices for milk suppliers in terms of sustainability actions that can be selected. The reason that was important to me was we have to allow for innovation, research coming through. If a feed additive, if some form of technology, we shouldn't be handcuffed by what we defined in 2021 as being the destination of our journey over 3 to 4 years, but that we have the flexibility. My final slide is really just to finish on a picture. When our suppliers step into the sustainability cafe, so to speak, these are the 18 actions they're presented with. These are and if we have a look at them for a moment, when we talk about carbon reduction, it's measuring grass growth, it's clover use, multi-species milk recording, improving herd EBI and the use of low protein crude feeds. Air quality is about low emission slurry spreading, use of protected urea. Biodiversity is about native trees and hedging. Soil health, soil nutrient management plan. Water protection, having an asset water quality plan in place, fencing off water courses. The whole area there around fossil fuel use and animal health and welfare. So you get a real wholesome approach being taken here. But what's really important for me is that each of the measures that are selected can be derived, or there's a correlation between the actions here and the science around the marginal abatement cost curve. And on the basis of the science being right, it will, touch wood, lead to positive action on climate, ammonia, biodiversity, water quality and energy. So I hope I've given you a sense of how we're taking the science and research and really turning it into a tangible action at farm level. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Thomas, and for talking us through who Tirlán are. And you can focus on the payments bit and on the bonus and what you touched on at the end, but it's also what I found interesting was the advisory role and the capacity building, and hopefully we'll be able to get into that a little bit more in the discussion. So we're going to move on now to our next speaker, who is Paul O'Brien, and Paul was elected chair of the Irish Farmers Association, so the IFA's Environment and Rural Affairs Committee in 2020. Paul is a farmer from Graignamanagh in County Kilkenny, runs a sheep and a tillage enterprise. So over to you, Paul.
Okay, very good afternoon to you all, and look, thank you for the invitation to speak to you today. I don't have a slide presentation because I felt that this, as a farmer, speaking on behalf of farmers, this has to come from the heart. This has to be a true reflection of how farmers are feeling today, probably the pressure that we are on, and really just to maybe speak to an audience of people who have maybe said farming's got to do more. So this is really, I suppose, the challenge of our times. And look, Thomas's presentation was excellent and it covered a lot of the stuff that farmers are doing. But the reality is that, there's always a request for us to do more. There is an acknowledgement, yes, on the farming community that we can do more, that we are prepared to do more. But what there has to be an understanding of is that the amount and the asks that from farmers that we've been expected to do has become a considerable challenge. I would suggest it's the biggest challenge of our generation in farming by a long way. We're dealing with the climate targets of 25%. We're dealing with the challenges of EU policy. And people probably are in the room, and it's been spoken about a good bit today, about how are farmers not engaged with the biodiversity or the nature restoration law. That could not be a complete opposite of where we are as farmers. Farmers received their Space for Nature calculations last September, which said as farmers, we have between 12 and 14% of our land dedicated to Space for Nature. We've been on this journey for years and years and years. When it comes to things such as the nature restoration law, we are saying, yes, you need to stop as a commission. Go back and take a look at this to deliver a policy that has the ability to work properly at farm level. It's because at the moment, the law is being signed in or potentially will be signed in with no engagement from farmers, with no evaluation of the amount of land or what type of re-wetting or reinstating, what does that look like? Absolutely no quantifiable amount of land that will be needed. It's just too vague. So when as farmers we're saying we're against this, it is explain to us, Commission, what your aspirations are, how you can deliver that ambition to us, and as farmers, we can work with you to deliver that ambition. The reality is that, farmers are very suspicious with very, very long memories. The reality is that farmers that I talk to, and probably that's one of the main reasons why I'm here today, is because I talk to farmers on a regular basis. Last night I was in County Sligo talking to farmers. They're suspicious, and they're suspicious because of previous things that have been done in the past. Land was designated. Farmers were told you will be supported in that designation, you'll receive a payment. The payment stopped very, very quickly. But 20 years after, there still is designation in place that has an effect on their farming ability. So I'm appealing to everybody here, farmers, we're not going to say no. We are fully and able to meet any challenge dedicated to us or thrown at us. We would embrace that challenge as we've always done. But what we cannot do is take leaps of faith where we believe we're not going to be supported. So look, that's just some of the, I suppose, the headline issue of the day when we are talking about nature restoration. I do not want people here at the conference today thinking farmers, they're just going to say no. We are fully prepared to have a conversation as long as the Commission and our own government are prepared to have a proper two-way conversation. And I can't emphasise that enough to you. So look, one of my works that I do on behalf of the IFA is within Copa Cogeca. I'm not sure if everybody knows what Copa Cogeca it is, but it's an amalgamation of farmers groups in Brussels, so representing over 22 million farmers. Also, ICOS would be involved with the Cogeca element of it, over 22,000 co-ops. So therefore, we are the voice of agriculture in Europe. As a result of that, other countries in Europe have their own concerns when it comes to the nature restoration law. I am chair of a task force on biodiversity and soil and water in the Commission, in Copa Cogeca, working with the Commission. If I was talking to you in Sweden today or in Finland, foresters would have concerns. They would have problems with the nature restoration law as it's been described. We're clearly saying that without a proper impact assessment on an Irish scale is very, very difficult for the IFA and for, I'm sure, other farm organisations to get behind a nature restoration law as it's proposed at this particular moment in time. But look, farmers are doing their work. We have this kind of, there's a narrative being spun that as farmers, we are not prepared to engage. That could not be so far from the truth. We are the boots on the ground. We are dealing with this every day. We are embracing challenges, and as it's already been said, the amount of slurry being spread with low emission slurry spreading systems, the incorporation of clovers and multi-species swards, the change from protected to protected urea from normal nitrogen, all of that farmers are doing and they're embracing because they can see the rationale behind that. But some of the proposals that have come along is very, very difficult for anybody to be able to explain them to farmers on the ground. It's not really the job of the IFA or farm organisations. It should be the job of the Commission, the government, the semi-states to go out and explain what is expected of them on behalf of the policy direction that they're being brought on. So there's just some of the things. I do have concerns. We have never spoken so much in the last couple of weeks about, or months, and particularly since the Green Deal was constructed, about production reduction. Very firmly, that is alien to where farmers have been for the last 40, 50, 60 years. For the first time in a commission, we've actively been discouraged from production. What will be there to fill the void? It's because if you're asking farmers to fundamentally change their farm businesses and not giving them a viable opportunity to do something else, that void will be created will be filled with suspicion. So there's a challenge on everybody in this room, a challenge on the UN, the EU, our own government, our semi-states, everybody, and including the EPA. That's the challenge. We cannot leave farmers void of an income going forward. If we are talking about land use change in forestry and all of the challenges that's going to be created, that is having an effect on other parts of the industry at the moment. For instance, we talked about the nitrates changes that could potentially be impacted in the next couple of months and starting on the 1st of January next year. That's already had an effect on other parts of the industry. The tillage sector, where there's an ambition in the Climate Action Plan to have an increase of 50,000 hectares of additional tillage, is going to be under considerable pressure to be able to be delivered while that these figures while there's the potential to lose the 250 down to 220 kgs of organic nitrogen per hectare. There's consequences. So it takes a part of bigger thinking. I suppose when we are looking at this, and it was very disappointing today to listen to Minister McConalogue say that there's going to be no payment for ash dieback. So in other words, as we try to meet other parts of the Climate Action Plan by trying to incorporate more forestry in our farms, one of the big legacy issues that we have of our time is not going to be supported. He has clearly stated today that there's going to be no funding for ash dieback. Now, I have a very small piece of ash plantation on my farm. It probably means I'll be flipping burgers at a drive-through in my 80s because my pension is going to be detrimentally affected as a result. But it's very hard for farmers to be given confidence that you will be supported in any transition if a glaring mistake that was done by the state a number of years ago isn't being owned by the state. No farmers imported ash with diseased ash into the country. That was done by the Department of Agriculture, who should have been supervising these trees coming into the country. So these are the challenges of our time. They are immense. I've said before to members of my committee and farmers, this is the biggest individual challenge of our farming careers. What we do today is going to have a massive effect going forward in trying to incorporate new, younger members to join farming going forward. That's a key problem that we have. We don't have enough young farmers entering the business. That is going to create numerous problems going forward. This is a problem throughout Europe. Figures out there that we've lost millions of farmers in the last 20 years in Europe. Food-producing nations. Germany's the first time that they are now going to have to import food since the end of the Second World War. We have lost the we have lost the value of food production. I understand there's going to be challenges going forward, and we are going to have to look at new streams and new work coming through, and whether it's anaerobic digestion and 100,000 hectares of land going to feed AED plants. That's going to be another challenge. But every day farmers are meeting challenges. But it's up to the state, the commission, the semi-states and the departments to work with farmers to be able to take them and help them on that transition. And at the moment, I would have to suggest that hasn't been communicated properly. So look, that's just some of my things, but I must admit, as somebody who is trying to encourage one of my children to eventually come in farming after me, it's getting harder and harder. They see farming now as an industry that is not sexy anymore. They see it as something that is seen in the public opinion as being, is damaging to the environment. We all need 3 meals a day. We can't forget that. You might need a doctor once a year, hopefully. You might need a solicitor once every 5 years, but you will need a farmer 3 times a day, every single day of your life. So look, that's just my, it wasn't a presentation, but it was from the heart. And I do believe that there's an onus on everybody in this room to take that message away with you today to your organisations or to whoever you feel that you need to talk to us about. Farmers will go on this journey, but we cannot jump off cliffs and hope that somebody will be able to catch us in the net after. It's because history in the past has clearly proven that is not the case. Farmers in the West who have had land designated over the last 20 or 30 years, when I talk to them about the nature restoration laws, they look at this with, not again. This is why red lines are going to be set, and that is unfortunate. So my takeaway message today, and giving it to yourselves, is this can be talked about, negotiated at a farmer to a commission level. We need proper engagement going forward, because at the moment we've been spoken to and not with. And that can't happen going forward if we are to meet the challenges that the LULUCF and climate change, and to meet our sectorial targets. That can't happen. So thank you.
Thanks very much, Paul, for that. And Paul mentioned the theme throughout his talk there was about having a two-way conversation, and we really did want to have that today through the conference, and particularly in this session. And to be honest, despite having a fantastic panel now, we really did struggle to get farmers to come here and talk to us today, and in particular a female farmer. But we are now delighted and thrilled to say that Nicole Keegan has stepped into the breach. So Nicole is up next, and she is a younger farmer going to bring us a perspective from Inishannon in County Cork, and she is also an MSc student at the South East Technological University.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm going to be sparing you from a presentation as well. As mentioned, it was quite short notice. I committed to this at about 2-3 p.m. yesterday. So I will be using cheat notes. I do apologise in advance. But I just want to start by crediting the EPA on the magnificent work that was put into today's conference. Organising events such as this is no easy task, and particularly when it's a subject matter of such high importance. The room has been filled today by experts and people in the industry and studies, and we need to continue with this open dialogue. This is really, really important to the success of this. And I just want to thank everyone for the invitation today to speak amongst you, and I want to give the perspective of a young person in the agricultural industry, a young person who will hopefully be farming for decades to come. And so the issues being discussed here and the policies and laws being thought of and fought over in government on the daily have a really significant impact on my future and the future of Ireland's youth. My name is Nicole Keohane. and I'm a dairy farmer and a postgraduate researcher at the South East Technological University. And I'm also a proud member of Macra na Firma, an organisation for young farmers. I farm in Inishannon, County Cork, alongside my grandparents John and Anne, who themselves have been the custodians of our farm for the past 40-odd years. Our farm, which is situated at the top of a valley and overlooks the River Bandon, a farm which is my future. In the past, the beginning of our legacy on the land, the farm was home to a dozen cows, a variety of vegetables, cereal, crops, chicken, sheep, your standard old MacDonald farm. And in the decades since, my grandparents have done an exceptional job in bringing the farm to a place whereby it was able to support a growing family and feed more than just our neighbours. This progression was supported by research, investment and necessity. A necessity to update our farming practices, land utilisation and outputs, as asked of us by our government over the years. A story like any other Irish family farm. Presently, we are milking 92 cows on 113 acres. A farmer telling you how much they're farming, it's quite rare. And we're at the beginning of a roadmap for successorship for me. A map where, although my grandparents started the near finish point, I'm only at the very beginning. Along my grandparents' own journey, they have completed many tasks. They have increased output through focusing on better breeding strategies, which in turn have improved cow health and reduced our carbon emissions per kilo of milk produced. They have employed all the advised sustainable farming practices. They have incorporated clover to reduce our chemical nitrogen reliance. They have limed soils regularly. They have maintained soil nutrient levels, purchased new low-emission slurry spreading equipment, converted every shed and rooftop on the farm to ensure that we harvest every drop of rainwater that we can, only to name a few. The same as the 70% of dairy farmers who themselves have invested in this low-emission slurry spreading technology, the 90% who have incorporated clover into their swards, and the 96% who have signed up for sustainability programs. That is a huge commitment from farmers, and it does need to be recognised. Farmers who have always done as they are told. They have increased farm efficiency and yields to increase our export potential, boost our gross domestic product, and get our subsidy payment so we could make a living wage and support our families. But now we enter a new era, an era where decades past of government policy has been thrown out the window overnight due to necessity. A necessity to reverse biodiversity loss, reduce our carbon emissions, and slow down the rate of climate change. Farmers have been tasked with this significant challenge, the same as anyone else in the industry. Energy, we're all in a similar position. But this challenge for us has come alongside falling milk prices, sustained or perhaps inflated input costs, and an expectation to maintain our outputs at the same time. A challenge which, although farmers recognise is crucial to the continued success of our industry, has resulted in fear. A fear due to a lack of support, at times knowledge and communication, because although we are one of the key stakeholders, too often we have been dismissed or uninvited from these conversations taking place. Thomas today showed us the results of the UCD study, and we saw quite clearly what the top 3 fears are of farmers. And again, legislative change was a big issue in that because of fear and unknown. And this is my present. It's not an easy beginning point by any means, but I'm in the same position as any other young farmer out there. Young farmers who are highly educated, motivated, and forward-thinking. We are the ones who will be living with the impacts of these new proposed laws and plans, but also the consequences if we don't engage with these new laws and plans. So therefore I am, and we are, adapt to change, and we welcome it. But with this change needs to come transparent engagement and discussions, considerations for the impacts of these policies on all, and government and supports to ensure successful implementation. Yes, that is economic, but that is also advice and transparency. It is money, but it's not all money. And I've been listening to the talks here today, and I can see that we are on the right road. We just need to be more cohesive in our thinking and our communications. My future. As I mentioned, I'm only at the starting line. In the planning stages of what I want to do with the farm and what I want my legacy on the land to be, my passions include agriculture, research, nature, and education. These combined interests have inadvertently led me down the road of regenerative agriculture. Because regeneration is an important word and one we sometimes miss out on, because regeneration is leaving something better than how we found it, whereas at times sustaining is only ensuring that it gets no worse. We sometimes forget how we need to improve. This week, I sat in the Teagasc Education Centre in Portlaoise to partake in the Signpost Advisory Workshop, which had been organised by Teagasc for Macra na Firma members. This workshop was able to provide me with basic farm figures which every farmer in the country should know. I was able to determine my total farm emissions, my kilos of carbon dioxide, my emissions per hectare, and my emissions per kilo of milk produced. It allowed me to make theoretical changes to my farm. Decrease fertiliser usage, change slurry spreading dates and cattle turnout dates, and observe the subsequent reductions in my current calculated emissions. It's a planning tool which every farmer will be given access to in time and needs engagement with. But more importantly, it provided me with some of the data I need to benchmark my farm. Because Irish farms are lacking benchmark data across the board. How can we expect to improve if we do not know where we currently are, what options are available to us, and the impact of any options that we do implement? And on that today, it was great to see the new mapping capabilities, and these resources are being put on the ground. But a lot of these I wasn't actually privy to until today, so we need to increase that communication and let farmers know that these facilities are there and provide the advice for them. I have sat down with this benchmark data over the past few days, and I've used it to plan. What are my goals for the farm and myself over the next 5 years? And I've identified 4 key areas for improvement on my farm. Number 1, I want to increase the land area availability to wildlife and habitats. Nature is a huge interest and passion of mine. But the issue with this is that I don't have enough of a land base to set aside permanent wildlife residents while also ensuring that my farm is profitable. Because as we said, you can't be green if you're in the red. So I'm exploring my options. Why can't I incorporate area for wildlife and biodiversity into my currently productive ground? And this led me to option 2, the inclusion of multi-species on farm. As a student in SCTU, I am witness firsthand the trial plots and research currently being undertaken on farms. I have seen the implementation of these multi-species with a zero chemical nitrogen approach, and it's working. The fields are productive, soil structure is improving, drought resistance increasing, earthworm populations increasing, and other biodiversity markers are improving. And along with this, our input costs are decreasing because we're not having to pay large amounts for fertilizers. It's amazing what can be done with an investment in research and engagement. Number 3, I want to reduce my reliance on chemical fertilizers. My second goal will already have addressed this and allow me to be at the starting point, but I will also need to place more emphasis on my grassland management and continue to educate myself and observe and see what is working and what isn't working. I will need to increase my manure storage. I need to allocate areas for a 2 to 3 year compost period for my manure, which currently is only sitting at 1. But there is no point in me implementing any of the above measures if I cannot support myself or my family in return. I will already have reduced my input costs, ensured that grass availability is not an issue, and improved my soil fertility. And again, reliance on increased earthworm populations, soil structure, and soil microbial community will contribute to this goal. And it's going to sound mad to some. It's going to sound very logical to others. But to me, it's my plan. It's my starting point. It's an experiment. And I can't do it all in 1 day or even 1 year. I can only do it 1 field at a time and with the right support systems in place. I am extremely lucky to have the support of my parents and my grandparents. They entertain my often out-of-the-box notions, and they allow me to implement these, and most importantly, they allow me to fail and to learn from these failures. But this support system isn't available to every farmer in the country, and they're often being dissuaded from continuing in our sector. Currently, only 1 in every 16 farmers are under the age of 35, and over 33% of farmers listed as head of holdings are over the age of 65. So imagine that in your own industries. 33% of your workforce are past retirement age. It's crazy. And that also means that there's not enough representation for young farmers who have the same passion and education as me and want to see these changes continue. So we need that platform to be included in these discussions. It's a key challenge to everything that we have discussed here today. Look at the new CAP, which although should have included a successive positive retirement scheme, it instead focused on an exit plan for farmers. New generations who, like me, have plans, who want to enter into this new era of farming, implement, if not the same, but more innovative plans than I. And again, look at the nature restoration policy, which has garnered a lot of media attention in the last few days, and a lot of that attention has been focused on the re-wetting of peat soils. This proposition, again, neglected the young farmers and a lot of the rural people of Ireland and really didn't truly consider the impacts it would have on them. And as young farmers currently producing food off upland or peatland soils, they will be heavily impacted by these measures and subsequently deterred from the industry yet again. Is it going to be a case whereby we are left with even fewer young farmers in Ireland and not have a continuation for ourselves? That we will be forced to import increased levels of food to feed our own population, food which perhaps may not be subjected to the same compliance requirements that are expected of our own farmers, but the impacts of these have not yet been fully thought out. It is possible that instead of reducing our emissions, we are perhaps increasing our carbon leakage. These are the consequences. We recognise the carbon storage potential of this land and we want to engage, but we need to be engaged. I'm an advocate for Irish agriculture, for the dairy industry, for young farmers, but also for the environment and for biodiversity. I cannot be one without the other. Farming is only ever able to occur because of what nature has provided us with. Of course, nature is not an indefinite resource and it cannot support indefinite growth. We have to act. It is necessary that nature restoration continue and protection be put in place. But it needs to be done correctly and based on evidence, and we're working towards that and getting more every day. Irish farmers, again, need to be engaged with. We are key stakeholders in this, and we want to be a part of this solution. But it has to be inclusive, unambiguous, and realistic goals have to be set in place. Because successive governments have had a history of signing up to EU laws and directives only to fail to follow through with the necessary supports as outlined by Paul a minute ago. I was reading an article in the Examiner the other day by Pádraig Fogarty, and he put it very simply. As a country, we were capable of rescuing the banks a decade and a half ago, and now we need to do the same with nature. It's time for a bailout. And yes, again, we need to do this carefully. I can't emphasise that enough, because the media and many new legislations have a tendency of appearing to pit food production against the environment, and this cannot be the case. It's a feedback system. I need nature, I need what it provides me with to produce food, but I also need to provide back, allow biodiversity to thrive, improve my soils, and place emphasis on these symbiotic relationships. And we need leadership in this, strong leadership. We need leadership by the state, an investment in research, which we're seeing here today by the EPA, and an investment in the next generation. We need a clear plan which can produce results, allow us to meet these targets to restore wildlife to viable levels. And we also need to stop pointing the finger at one another, and instead we need to come together and find a solution. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nicole. That was absolutely fantastic and really with such short notice. Well done for rising to the challenge of that. So many themes there that Nicole raised that I hope we'll be able to draw out a little bit more during the discussion. So the next speaker we have is Dr. Fran Igo. Fran is the Southern Regional Coordinator for LOPRO, the Local Authorities Water Programme, which is a shared service working with the local communities and relevant stakeholders. So I'll hand over to Fran.
Hello everybody, it's a real pleasure to follow Nicole and Paul and Thomas because some of these slides I'm going to show through my presentation actually were developed with farmers on the ground, problem solving collectively together, and I have to say it was a really rewarding part of my job at that time. I was asked by Conor to talk about nature-based solutions and multiple benefits. I put together a presentation on urban nature-based solutions, and Conor said, no, actually we want a bit more on the rural side as well, so I've tried to mix it up. So what I have here, just to, I suppose, give a context for me, my background, I used to work in fisheries before, and this when nature-based solutions for me became real in terms of what they can deliver. And the slide that you have in front of you there is the River Groody down in Limerick. The ring road was being built at the time, and the design plans for that ring road was to move the river and put it between gabion baskets. They're baskets full of gravel. You may have seen it along motorways. And the bedded rivers wells, which was, from an environmental point of view, was not great in terms of biodiversity and fish. And you can, so we got involved in fisheries and basically worked with the engineers to basically apply natural processes, put in meanders, bring in rock, bring in spawn and gravel, and that was the result there after 2 years. You can see there, from a fish point of view, was excellent. We got great spawning, and also from the vertical point of view. This was what was actually proposed. So that would have been a disaster from an environmental point of view, and this is what it looks like now. I took that photograph only last week. That project actually saved the state up to €100,000 is what the engineers calculated at the time by us doing it this way. So it was a different way. So I guess with nature-based solutions, it's about trying to be smart, I suppose, but at the same time be real. They can only deliver so much. So my background and where I'm working is with water. I work with the on the Water Framework Directive with the Local Authority Waters Programme. And for us, we have to start planning around climate in terms of adaptation and climate mitigation. And as you can see there on the slide, look, it's clear, we experience climate change through water, whether it's droughts, floods, etc. So as a society, we have to be planning this, and this is what a lot of this conversation is about. But climate adaptation as well as mitigation is something we have to be thinking about in terms of resilient communities and resilient sectors. How we manage our water is through the River Basin Management Plan. That's all part of the EU Water Framework Directive, which all member states are signed up to. Every 6 years we report back. The EPA do excellent work. They do the modelling, the collect the data, etc. And then colleagues right across the sectors, including the co-ops and the ASAP programme, which Tom talked about, work collectively with the various stakeholders to try and deliver outcomes on the ground. Work through the programme measures with the Department of Housing. What are those programme measures? Who owns them, etc. And then work it through. And then the EPA reports back, and you can see how that's done in terms of categorising water quality. So it's either we're trying to attain either good or high, depending on the objective. How is this done? We look at the landscape as a geographic unit, and then work through that in terms of looking for place the right measure in the right place. Try and be smart about it, but taking it at a catchment level. So basically, where does the rain fall from the sky? Where does it gather up? And then follow it through. In the next River Basin Management Plan that's pending soon, we'll be breaking this down at the next level, which will be the 46 catchments across the country. But it is important that we tie in the biodiversity and we tie in climate going forward in a meaningful way and not in a tokenistic way. How we actually try and resolve the problems and actually work through them, we do this through integrated catchment management. You're probably familiar with this, but basically looking at everything, all activities, try and work through, what are the significant pressures, but all pressures are significant, I guess, at a level depending on what scale you're working at, and then work through, how do we then put together our measures in terms of water quality protection and restoration where that's needed. This framework, can work as well in terms of carbon sequestration if we're smart about it, in our opinion, and also from a biodiversity point of view. A lot of our rivers, for example, are SACs, or linear systems as well. But often we don't have all the organisations working together, talking together, and a running team here is communication across back to the public and internally amongst ourselves to make sure that we're all on message and working to a common goal. From our point of view, our current concerns of water quality in terms of human consumption, water quality in terms of availability, abstraction, etc. Hydrology, how the water moves through the landscape, hydromorphology, the shape of a river, whatever, dams, weirs, human interventions, the dependent ecology. Very important. What's the public good here in terms of, is it fisheries, is it shellfish production, is it a water for livestock, whatever. Protect that as a resource. Invasive species, they move very, very quickly through catchments once they get into rivers systems, so that becomes a problem once they get there. From an amenity point of view and community wellbeing point of view, this comes through very, very strongly when we do our consultations on the river-based management planning. So it is something that the public are switched on about, and often that's how they relate to water. When we ask about water quality, they don't talk about water quality. They talk about kayaking down the river. They talk about going for a nice walk by the river, or going for a swim, or being able to go for a swim. That's something that they relate to. And then look, for us projecting forward in terms of climate, we need to be thinking about in terms of how do we plan for our water management, let's say, if we're facing greater floods or higher intensity rainfall periods or droughts, etc. How we even design how we manage pollution and the assimilative capacity for our systems to actually absorb what pollutants might be coming in, we have to change that, because in drought conditions, particularly in high status water bodies, sensitive water bodies, they won't have the same assimilative capacity, so we need to be thinking about that. All of these exacerbate the impacts in terms of water quality objectives. But there are opportunities here where we can maybe look across the different areas of interest and see is there commonality, and see can we actually address some of these together. Now, the way it works in the river-based management plan, there's a whole range of governance structures, a whole hierarchy of a governance structure. At the regional level, we have these committees. Each of these committees meet on a quarterly basis. That's all the agencies and organisations either with a regulatory responsibility or with a responsibility to manage an activity that's either impacting or that's actually benefiting from water quality. So we all meet. It's really, really good, process. We could have up to 60 people in a room from 26 plus organisations, all working through. There's an example here down in Waterford on the Nara Valley. So the meeting was held in the morning. Then we met up with the local sheep farmers and Mountaineer Ireland to look through the various issues affecting that particular high status water body, which is also objective water body, which is also an SAC. It's failing on everything in terms of where it needs to go. And you can see there, some of the issues, wildfires, etc., that was mentioned this morning in terms of a carbon issue. But to try and work through all those, we can't do this on our own. We have to start linking in with all the various sectors and action. This is what the public wants. They want action, not talking. Action. So we try and do that as best we can. And the new river-based management plan will be reducing that down into the next level. But we need to adapt. We need to adapt how we're actually looking at our measures. What measures are we using? Look at the opportunities and the learnings that's coming through. There is some new stuff coming through. And of course, where necessary, and Paul touched on this, and Nicole as well, just transition in terms of, we have to be thinking this through. What are the consequences of our decisions? So nature-based solutions are one of the tools in the box in terms of how we manage all of this. They're not the only solution, but they are an important solution. There's a whole range of different types depending on the context. In the urban area, when we think about, I suppose, nature-based solutions from our point of view, we had an event actually on today. It was running parallel with this session. There was several hundred people online going through nature-based solutions for urban spaces, and all those videos will be available to anybody who's interested in that type of stuff in the urban area. From our point of view, looking at climate adaptation, when the rain hits the ground, it's going to become more intense. It's going to move faster through the hard surfaces because you don't have the saturation or the filtration. The way we normally deal with this, often in Ireland, is put underground, into the gully, into a box, a culvert, into an attenuation basin underground. Not really great in terms of the nature benefits that we can accrue if we keep everything overground. And there's a lovely example there from Wexford outside the Department of Housing building there, where you have a nice wetland, it attenuates the water, it's doing its thing in terms of biodiversity, and aesthetically it's very pretty. Other examples, I just took some here down in Wexford over the weekend, just to show you, there's different techniques for different contexts and different places. So, for example, greening up your car parking spaces, green roofs, water attenuation, and swales, etc., rather than having buried channels that can block. From the point of view of the user experience, these things actually can be very pretty. They're very popular. The public have said to us during our recent consultations back in December to March, they do like this stuff. They want to see more of this type of stuff being built into our urban landscapes to soften up how things look. And aesthetically, you can see that swale there. That's pretty, but it's taking the water from the car park. It's going to be filtering that water out. And on the right-hand side, you've got your trees growing there, sequestering carbon and doing their climate thing as well. The same park there in Wexford, you can see here the trees here, your semi-natural woodland has been left there. And again, they're going to be growing away, doing their thing. And it's a really beautiful place to go. So moving away from all these neatly mowed areas, it's a very popular space. As I said, the traditional way we often do it in Ireland is we put the water underground. We can't climate adapt. We don't know where they are. They will fail eventually. We know this from discussions with colleagues. This is an example literally right across from the photograph I just showed you of the wetland in front of the other building. And that's an attenuation tank that has collapsed. It had to be filled with sand. It's a hazard, and it's going to cost the local authority a fortune to try and fix it. So if it was overground, we wouldn't have the same level of, when things go wrong, it can go badly wrong. While if we can see it overground, all the better. Moving on to the rural side of things, this is a schematic from the rural, the Federation, from Inform Michigan, but it's also in the River-Based Management Plan. As it was mentioned earlier, agriculture, forestry, they are nature-based activities in reality, but we do have to at times put in measures to try and, I suppose, provide a buffer between an activity, manage the risk in terms of receptor. And you can see on the illustration here, those, whilst the primary purpose may be for water quality management, they do bring in other multiple benefits, including climate mitigation, depending on what they are. And this brings me on to the project I used to work on down in North Cork, Upper Blackwater, working with a community group. It was a 2 million project over 5 years. The work is continuing on. Development company Ardita Hallow, fantastic social inclusion work. We worked with teams on the rural social scheme, and who were farmers working on the scheme, and then on the two unemployment schemes. We had up to 20 people working on any given day. Huge benefits in terms of the work that we were doing, trying to address the issues affecting the conservation species. But what struck me this morning, actually, it's funny because I actually had put in a slide of the mental health side of things, really struck me when I was working there. We never had the time to capture it. But I do remember one participant saying to me when he was finishing up after his year, I said, look, I'm sorry we couldn't pay any more money. He said, Fran, don't worry about it. He said, I really enjoyed the experience. Sure, what else would I have been doing on the climbing the walls? And it was quite interesting to get that. I never expected it. And then another time walking down, meeting one of the farmers I was working with, and he was looking up at the sky. And I said, Tony, what are you at? And he said to me, the swallows are back. And then he said, I look at my farm differently now. And I thought that was really nice, that, the stuff that we were doing, the conversations that we're having around the otters and whatever it was, he was very much part of that. And that went for all the farmers up along the catchment. They really got stuck in. And there's other projects that are doing stuff similar to this. They're listed there, I won't go into them. But some of the measures that we did at the time was, fencing. There's a challenge to get riparian buffers in because the river would flood at the land. So we had to adapt a special technique on some of the farms. But you can see there in the photograph, there was a lot of co-development going on. Management of drains, that was a big issue in the catchment, direct siltation into the SAC. We developed these silt traps with the farmers. That was all done together, and you can see how effective those traps were. If you look at the left and the right there on the image there, you can see these things were really worked. They needed maintenance, but they really worked. Native tree planting, we planted thousands and thousands of trees. And anytime it was raining and the river was high, we went planting trees during the months of the hours. And you can see here, these are willow. I mean, these are a magical tree. You can see these were put in a little pond, and you can see the roots all growing there after about a month's time. So we did up big huge stakes. So it wasn't just slips; they were big stakes. We were trying to do this and address some very challenging situations. So this is one of the local farmers working on a project with us, Joe. And again, these guys would meet up. Often they were living on their own, quite isolated, working in groups together. So the conversations would be about farming, and then about what we're doing. And they were really proud of being involved in a bigger project, that people were looking in and really interested in. Sometimes we had to deal with severe issues like, some of the banks where it was eroding, faster than I suppose we consider normal, because a bit of erosion is good. We did have to come in and do some more serious interventions, and we mixed it up with a bit of rock, but we tried to keep it as nature-based as possible and be as careful as possible to do this, bearing in mind it was an SAC. We used recycled Christmas trees to help, I suppose, slow the flow and trap the silt. And then you can see this, what it was like after 2 years. Fantastic response on that bank. And then this is it last weekend. So you can see the trees, they're growing on the bank, really nice. So these are now sequestering carbon. They've done their job in terms of stabilising those banks there. There's freshwater permussel beds just downstream of those banks. In terms of the multiple benefits, the banks are more stable. The river's more resilient in terms of climate. You can get more flash flooding, whatever. But the roots of the willow will be sequestering carbon. From a biodiversity point of view, They were working, and from a farmer's point of view, managing his land. That project's moved on now. They're working on wetlands as well. Again, if they're designed right, they can sequester carbon. And Nicole mentioned the multi-sea swards. In the work that we're doing now, there's a lot of discussions around this, bringing it out, looking back at the landscape. So can we mix up these measures? I understand that they're limited sometimes in terms of carbon sequestration, but I suppose we need to be thinking about the combination of all of those things and retaining what we have. Really important in terms of what we have in landscapes. Can we keep them? Can we hold on to them? Hedgerows, they help manage and regulate water, surface water flow. They help infiltrate water into the soils, which is very important in terms of what we're trying to achieve, but also to bring all those other benefits. It's quite obvious. So this is something that we can kind of look at and retain. We don't always value what we have, and it's important we communicate this to people living in areas. Every water body has a public good, whether it's for drinking, for permuses, for spawning fish, whatever it is, for recreation. Every water body has its own little personality, I'd argue, and it's important we look after them and see it from that point of view, because they're unique, and that's where pride of place comes in. And public participation, really important. And that project did a huge amount of that. There is, however, this comes true at our meetings sometimes. There are times where there is not great practice going on, and it's important we communicate that back. So the example on the left-hand side, top left, for example, that was because there was a misunderstanding by the landowner, thought that he was going to lose his land eligibility, so therefore went in. So it's really important that we need to inform people, look, riparian buffers and stuff, it's okay. Leave them there, you don't have to take them out, it's not going to affect your payment. This is gets me onto the awareness piece, public education. We need to do better. We're not doing good at the moment in terms of how we communicate at the national level. And right down to, boil water notices. What's behind the boil water notice? It's not the rain falling from the sky. It's whatever's picking up on the ground. So we have to start planning, managing the risk, whether it's a treatment plant or whatever in terms of landscape, whatever it might be picking up. If there's a land practice that needs to change, that we need to be thinking about that and planning it. But communicate to the public what's the reason behind the various notices that are coming through. And link it back to get people thinking about climate change. In terms of what these nature-based solutions can do, there's a whole range of benefits, so I won't read them out there. But often we don't look at them in that context. We look at one, a singular objective. We're not looking at the round. And also, because we're not doing that, it's often difficult to calculate the value of the co-benefit. And I think it's really important that we have to be doing this when we communicate with the public and also with ourselves, so we can leverage, I suppose, support from each other within the different state agencies and the sectors, etc. Get progress. Big challenge for us is actually get stuff done on the ground. Lots of plans, get stuff done on the ground. We see here now with the new plans, the biodiversity plans, the climate action plans, we'd have concerns around the climate plans. We've got to get water in there, water resilience in there, really, really important, as well as the mitigation stuff. And how should we look at this? For us, the logical approach will be looking at the catchments, we're doing it anyhow for the water point of view. We have frameworks in place. We've got these regional committees, as I mentioned, and structures. Link that back into the biodiversity, link that back into the climate. And we have a lot of, I suppose, already people engaged in that, and maybe expand that out. But, we are conscious that there's other, it's not simple as that. So you have, within the new river-based management plan, we have the framework for integrated land and landscape management. Donald Daly, some of you may be ex-EPA, has done a lot of work on this. So bringing in the wider geology, bringing on in the air, etc. as well. So I'm finishing up, and I think I'm actually ahead of time.
No, you're not.
Okay, so here's my thoughts going forward. So, okay, nice one, Emer. Okay, climate change, look, it's on the slide there. Climate change, it will impact the water quality, we know this, and we need to start planning for it. And quantity, think of the abstraction that we see this as a big issue down in the southeast, and 2018 was a case in point. Catchments are, in my opinion, an appropriate landscape approach, certainly for water, but maybe for climate action as well, at least linking it in. Nature-based solutions do bring multiple benefits. And the support from the public is there. We got it consistently right across Ireland when just under 100 public meetings, and this came through as a really, really strong vein when we communicated on the river-based management plan. But we have to integrate the whole lot. measures that protect water potentially could be expanded out. We could be smart about it. Maybe look at, can we grow some of these measures or expand them out as alluvial woodlands, link it back into the SAC? Can we look at measures in the urban space that could actually reflect what's going on in the rural space and learn from the different sectors, you know, what's going on the urban side that might actually help mitigate, say, runoff from a farm drain or whatever, you know, and similarly for forestry, what are the learnings there and cross-pollinate? And that's a multidisciplinary approach. That's a multidisciplinary thinking. We need to do that. And communication. It's so obvious, and it was so obvious this morning. We've got to get this right amongst ourselves, get our language right, and also for the public. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And thanks very much. Cheers.
Thanks very much. That was spot on time and fascinating to hear all of that, particularly to see what happened in Duhallow and Cork. And really, we're similarly looking at this from the EPA, bringing our water programme and the work we do in terms of our water monitoring more into the climate space, thinking about how we need to change and adapt our water monitoring programme to understand what's happening within the water environment in the context of a changing climate. So the last speaker in this session, I'm delighted to welcome Dara McCullough, who's a journalist and a farmer. And Dara is going to talk to us on his perspectives on challenges facing farming. He runs a mixed farm in Meath. The main enterprises are cut flowers, bulbs, dairy cereals, and Christmas trees are also in the mix. And he's also a journalist and well known probably to many of you. So over to you, Dara.
Deathly silence. Don't worry, you're nearly there. This is the final furlong. I've, I suppose, a public profile because I've been lucky enough to spend the last 25 years reporting on agriculture and rural affairs on radio and TV and writing about it in the Agriculture Press, in the Farmers Journal and the Farming Independent. But actually for most of that time, I've been at home working on the farm. What we used to proudly describe as a commercial operation. Of course, that's kind of doublespeak for intensive farming, isn't it? Which comes with a bit of a whiff. It's a dairy operation with 600 cows. I'm in partnership with my neighbour, and I grow about 100 acres of cut flowers and foliage. I sometimes boast that I'm the 5th largest daffodil farmer in Ireland, but of course that's an idle boast when you realise that there's only 5 daffodil farmers in Ireland. But however, we grow 100 acres and it takes a bit of management. There's 40 people employed every spring there to pick and pack flowers. But I suppose I see the pressures and the challenges on farming from lots of different perspectives, with my media hat on when I'm out chatting to a fella on the side of a hill out in the west of Ireland, or when I'm at home trying to figure out how do we pay people a decent wage and do a good job and stay in business. And bear in mind, to stay in business in farming, to pay wages, to make a profit, we're operating on a global stage. Over 90% of the flowers that we grow at home are exported. They're exported mainly to Poland. I was speaking to Frank over lunch, and he was gobsmacked that we were sending flowers out to Poland. It's not that we're too big to supply the domestic market. It's more that if you become completely dependent on, you can't supply the domestic market in any real scale unless you're going through a supermarket. And once you're going through a supermarket, and once the supermarket feels they have you dependent on them, they will mercilessly grind down the prices that they would pay you. And I speak from first-hand experience. Before we grew daffodils, we were Ireland's largest onion farmers, and nearly went broke growing onions. I've squeezed in a lot in the last 25 years. But when my dad first started growing onions 40 years ago, it went great and we grew and grew. But in the latter 20 years, from the 1990s on, the competition increased all the time. And you're talking about onions from Holland, Spain, New Zealand, Argentina, whatever. And it's the reason why, and we couldn't cope. We couldn't match the competition. And it's the reason why today there's 47 million kilos of onions imported into Ireland every year. It's quite the number. And it's part of the reason I find myself shouting at the bloody radio every time I hear people spouting on about why doesn't Ireland grow more, a wider range of food and more food and yeah. And I'm kind of thinking, of course we can grow onions here. Anyone can grow onions in their back garden. But to grow them as cheap or cheaper than the competition is another story. We don't have as dry a climate as Holland. And I know our climate is getting warmer, but increasing weather extremes does not equate to a better onion growing climate. On average, the weather is getting warmer, but just like the fellow with his feet in the oven and his head in the freezer, on average, he's the right temperature. But a bit like onions, we don't do extremes. The onion is an interesting example of, what we think of in terms of sustainable food in an Irish agricultural context. You know that lovely brown skin you expect on your onion? You can't grow onions in Ireland and let them cure. You have to cure the onion to get that lovely brown skin. You can't leave them outside to cure, because by the time they've cured, the weather is often broken or fungal diseases have broken out and you get staining on the skin. So what we used to do was lift them when they were green and bring them into a shed, pile them up high, and turn on huge big gas burners and blow hot air on them. Now, forget about the cost for a second. Think of the carbon footprint of that. So fossil fuel being burnt to put a nice skin on these onions. And it's not just the carbon footprint of drying them, it was also, because we're in a damp climate, damp, warm climate, we're also healing on fungicides every other week to try and keep the diseases off the crop. Again, they don't need to do that in Holland or South Africa or New Zealand. And that's the reason why it's a bit counterintuitive, but even if you're putting an onion on a boat the other side of the world and you float it over to Ireland, it probably has a lower carbon footprint than the onion that's been grown on an Irish onion farm. Just something to consider. Let's get past onions, the micro of the onions, and look at the macro in terms of the Irish agricultural situation. Listen to Eamon Haughey and the other scientists. We're being told that we need to re-wet, replant, and rethink how we use the Irish landscape. Mention any of those things to Irish farmers and you're going to see the heckles rise in their neck. I thought I saw a few heckles in the back of Paul's neck earlier. Entirely understandable. Let's work through them. Re-wetting, number one. Straight in at top of the charts in the last couple of weeks. It seemed to come from nowhere to the point where in last week's Farmer's Journal, it was the headline on page 1, page 2, page 9, page 11, page 14, page 15, and page 23. And none of those headlines said, hey, let's do this, guys, Farmers, rightly, when they're confronted about re-wetting, they want to know, what impact is this going to have on my income? And it's kind of, poo-pooed or pushed aside that, lads, relax. We've got you covered. But as Paul alluded to, history tells a different story. And if somebody is telling you, listen, don't be worrying about your asset that you rely on a livelihood for, just leave it to us. Doesn't work. What impact is it going to have on the neighbours, on the field next door? If you wet one field, how do you stop the field next door that may not be in a re-wetting scheme being wetted? Nobody knows. What impact is it going to have on livestock? Is there going to be an increased risk of fluke, ticks? what type of farming can you do on re-wetted land? Can you graze it? How long can you graze it for? There's no answers to any of these questions out there at the moment, or at least it's not being communicated to farmers. And yet we're talking about re-wetting 8% of Irish grassland. I think it's 8%. And, you know, I remember going out on Teagasc open days to show lads how to implement drainage systems. And farmers would talk about winning the land back. It was a kind of a lifetime battle of kind of wrestling with nature and getting the land into production. So we want farmers just to turn that switch off, forget a lifetime's work, and be happy re-wetting their land. No wonder there's a huge backlash. But it doesn't have to be this way. So a couple of weeks ago, I was down with Maurice Deasy, a farmer in Tipperary, who maybe should be up here talking to you. Some of you may know him. He was addressing the Citizens' Assembly. He comes from what I call farming aristocracy. His granddad was head of the IFA. His dad was deputy president of the IFA. And they farm about 300 acres in Tipperary. Traditional, mixed farm, cereal sheep, few brood mares. Maurice is a Teagasc researcher. He's also pioneering lots of moves into regenerative farming that Nicole touched on earlier. And for that reason, he's one of the Farming for Nature ambassadors. So he's a very forward-thinking young farmer. A couple of points about Maurice's farm. In this year's single farm payment application, or whatever they call it these days, 40% of that farm qualified as space for nature in the EU's new CAP subsidy scheme rules. That's all the scrub, the woodland, the boggy areas that they would have been penalised for including for the last 20 or 30 years. And it kind of just, it's one small example of how bananas the way the scheme flip-flops and drives farmers like me and Maurice and everyone else bananas. One year I had areas cut out in my maps on my daffodil fields, the corners, little square, perfect square in each corner. I was going, what is going on here? There was no daffodils planted in each of these squares. And if you've ever had the privilege of driving a tractor when you're planting a root crop like daffodils or potatoes, you realise that you have a huge machine behind you, yeah? You drive into the corner, you lift up your machine. By the time you've turned around and put your machine down again, you've left a couple of metres blank, square. But some official in some department redlined out these squares on me and took part of my single farm payment away. You appeal it, you win it, but it's hassle and kind of insulting, and you're going, what is the point of the whole system? So Maurice has got 40% of his land now qualifies as space for nature. So just keep that figure in mind when you're being told that the Irish farming landscape is a huge monoculture of perennial ryegrass and Sitka spruce. He also reckons that he's reduced his fertiliser usage by 40% through all the things that Nicole was talking about in terms of regenerative farming, cover crops, using the soil microbiology better, multi-species swards. And I can speak from my own personal experience on our own farm. We've reduced our fertiliser usage in the last 5 years by 25%. These are real numbers, yeah? 25% less fertiliser being used across our dairy farm because 30% of the area is in multi-species swards. We actually planted multi-species swards before. We're one of the first in the country to do it because my partner Joe had gone off to South Africa, and it was 2018, and we were in the middle of a drought, and he came back from South Africa and said, this is the way these guys cope with droughts, we're going to try it. And every year we've planted more and more to the point where 30% of the grazing area is now in that multi-species sward. Go back to Maurice, and this is the point that I wanted to get to. Maurice has one field that is pure reclaimed bog. He's not that worried about re-wetting it because it produces less, and he understands that he'll be able to graze it for a few months in the summer anyway. So especially if there's an environmental payment associated with re-wetting, it'll probably be cost neutral for him. So it kind of proved to me that if a farmer understands what he's looking at and what the potential impact on his pocket is, granted, Morris is pretty enlightened in terms of your average farmer out there, but it is possible to have a positive conversation with farmers on something like re-wetting. How are we going to convince more farmers to, see it the same way as Morris? I think as a basic step, we need a demonstration farm. I was reading about, Pat O'Toole was writing about it in the Farmer's Journal, and he mentioned this idea of a demonstration farm. We have demonstration farms to demonstrate everything else in farming. How to get more milk out of your cows, how to produce more beef in your cattle, how to try and make money out of sheep. Seeing is believing. It'll cost a few bob, it'll take time, but guys, I can't stress it enough. If you're serious about implementing a massive U-turn in how we use our land in this country, how farmers think about land, how they feel about land, then we've got to get serious about it. Second item, re-wetting, replanting. I don't know what to say about forestry. You'd be a long time convincing farmers to plant their land. Like, the planting rates are miserably low for very good reasons. It's a nightmare to get planning to plant land in the first place. It's another nightmare to get a license to clear fell it when you have gone to the trouble of growing the trees. Farmers who did the right thing, like Paul, and planted ash, are now being left out to dry, hanging out to dry, because that was a deciduous tree that was better than Sitka spruce. Got infected. Tough luck, lads. You backed the wrong horse. And every farmer has neighbours, and if all the neighbours have been told that coniferous forests are bad, then why would anyone sign up, for a lifetime of trouble by, planting their land? So, if I can't see us hitting figures without some mad new idea coming out of left field somewhere about forestry in Ireland, but one suggestion I would make is that start with every farmer has to plant 1% of their land over the next 5 or 10 years. We all have, I know on my farm at home, I have corners that would amount to 1%. If I stuck trees in it, it wouldn't be the end of the world. Not expecting to have to go and do it for nothing, because, the corners, in theory, are making me a few bob. But, again, if it's cost neutral for the farmer, I think you'd be at least making a start. The last item, rethinking how we're using the farmland that we do use. And this kind of boils down to the national herd and a national cull. And I find the whole debate about national cull a bit tiresome, because, a couple of months ago, the Beef Vision Group, I think they're called, basically came out with a recommendation to say, yeah, you know what, we think that there's merit in some form of a cull, be it voluntary or otherwise. So everybody held their breath and was kind of waiting for an announcement on a national cull. Then the Minister of the Day turned around and said, do you know what, lads, don't be worrying about a cull. Chillax. It's supposed to be an emergency, right? It's supposed to be urgency, but you've got this conflicting messages coming at farmers. So, meanwhile, in the real world, back at home on my own farm, I know that we are going to be reducing our herd. Why are we doing that? And I had with Frank Convery over the lunch, I had another light bulb moment. We're doing it because we expect the derogation limit to reduce from 250 to 220 next year. And as Frank put it, we can't do without the derogation. It's worth too much to us. So in order to comply, rather than, you have options, You can rent more land, but land prices have gone bananas. You can outsource your contract rear, your young stock. We've already done that. Or you can export your nutrients. But if you export your nutrients, you're putting less nutrients into your own ground, you grow less grass, you can feed less cows. So we're going to reduce our cow numbers. Now, in our case, it's not the end of the world. 600 cows comes down to 575. We're still going to be busy, right? But just keep in mind that, you know, every 1% of cows that reduction in the national dairy herd is going to be about 16,000 less cows, which is certainly less emissions, but it's also going to be less output, less employment and less exports, because there is nothing going to take the place of the 25 cows that we're getting rid of at home. It's just that the cows are going to be spread out thinner. So we've probably already seen peak cows in Ireland, in my opinion. You know, there'll be a little bit of expansion in some places, but same way as New Zealand, if you look at New Zealand, their cow numbers are falling already. And bear in mind, this is on the back of years when there's been record profits made in dairy. And so the fact that output is dropping while it's one of the best times ever to be milking cows from a profitability point of view tells us something. It tells us that the next generation, successors, whatever, aren't signing up in their droves to milk cows. And I think the reasons are obvious. Dairy farming is a tough life, and if the headwinds are against you, you mightn't be that interested. 17 seconds left. Okay, I got to cut to the chase here. I think more interest in terms of national cull is the number of suckler cows that we've got wandering around the country, grazing happily, not making a profit, and you know, there's 900,000 of them. So we've got this huge loss-making source of emissions that nobody has had the gumption to figure out an alternative to, despite the fact that the alternative is staring at us in the face. So in my opinion, the alternative is anaerobic digesters. We take the grass, and rather than putting it into an emission-generating cow, we put it into an energy-generating plant that displaces fossil fuels. Why hasn't it happened? I don't know. Why have the French accepted the funding that was there in the EU to try and wean themselves off fossil fuels and more particularly Russian gas, and as a result put up so many anaerobic digestion plants that they're probably going to be in a position to export biogas to the likes of us in the future, despite the fact that we have the highest potential per capita for anaerobic gas production in the whole of the EU. The mind boggles. So to me, there's a lack of urgency amongst the policymakers to make stuff happen. There are solutions out there, and it's just a case of really the policymakers, in my opinion, putting in place the framework to allow it to happen. It's going to cost money, and they can't keep on coming out with things that just are lacking credibility. Their forestry targets for the last 20 years, for as long as I've been reporting, were way off. They have these new targets for tillage area, way off, and they have a target for anaerobic digestion plants that, in my opinion, by 2030, sounds like it's going to be way off. So what the answer is, I'm not an expert on, but every renewable energy developer that I've ever spoken to, and I've spoken to quite a few on farms all over the country. I have solar panels on my own farm. ESB networks is difficult and intransigent part of the equation. I have 50 kilowatts of panels up in my shed at the moment, up on a roof. By the way, I think that's where solar panels need to be, not on prime land. We've only got 10% of the country as prime land, and it's under pressure for solar panels. They should be on roofs. I look to triple my area of solar panels. I will shut up now. And I was asked for €5,000 from ESB Networks for them to come out and tell me how much it was going to cost me to upgrade my infrastructure to take that power and export it onto the grid. So I'm an example of a farmer who wants to be part of the renewable energy revolution, wants to do the right thing, but it is difficult, and I think we need more focused effort from on high. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Oh, yeah.
Okay, we're going to have a panel discussion now, and this is your opportunity to pose some questions to our panellists. Okay, so I mean, what I'm interested to know is a lot of the common theme during the discussion was how to improve engagement between the farming community and the policy system, scientists, research maybe. So maybe at the end we can come to some specific things that the panel members would like to see. But before we do that, I guess it's the opportunity really for the audience and for the people online to ask some questions. So first of all, people here, I see there's Frank Convery has a question.
Thomas, I was intrigued by the Tier Lawn portfolio and very excited about it. But I'm just wondering, I mean, in my mind, your Tier Lawn's carbon footprint in terms of global market competition and so on is a crucial metric. But you're offering your farmers 20 options, of which 7 will get them their bonus payment, so to speak. And I just wondered within the company, is there some idea of what you should be achieving corporately as your average carbon footprint, and whether you might have to tweak your 20 or somehow create to protect your market, basically. So I'm really curious about that. For everybody else, I'd love to know we got a flavour of it at the end from Dara, but what one policy change would you want from the system to really drive the climate conservation agenda at scale? Thank you.
Okay, and let's have a few questions together, and then we can open it up for discussion. There's a microphone here.
Hi there, thanks. Robert Moss from Atashka. Yeah, I got a simple question, and you kind of skirted around it, and Dara was talking about it a bit on the ground, on the working farm. But what would land use supports look like, to get away from the industrial high-intensity farming that you were describing, not necessarily your own practice?
It's okay.
But, where you've got high chemical use, a high carbon footprint, and low biodiversity. My question, I just want to kind of explain where I'm coming from. I'm working with Antarctica, trying to do a low-carbon plan in Maynooth with the community, and we're specifically engaging with the agricultural sector, because it seems pretty silly to have a low-carbon plan for a town and just ignore all the farms around the town. I thought that was just ridiculous. So we're doing that. And the farmers, they're interested, and they're coming along, and they're asking questions. But what would really help is making this kind of mental assumption, this kind of creative thought. Assume there was no EU Commission, there was no Department of Agriculture, yeah, no EPA even, just all the adults in the room here. What would you need to be able to get away from the current system of high intensity farming? What sort of structure might work? And that's it, really. I apologise if I haven't framed the question as coherently.
That's okay, and I think it fits in. It's a common theme with one aspect of Frank's question earlier. So let's take another question then. Let's get a microphone here.
I remember from a few years ago, NUIG looking at traditions of cattle, and found that cattle originally lived alongside rivers and had fish oils, and by adding amigo oils into their diet could actually reduce substantially methane production. Has that been looked at recently in the last 5 years since, or is it just something forgotten about?
Okay, thanks very much. Okay, so who wants to open up the discussion then? Thomas, you're looking, you had a direct question.
Yeah, Frank, thanks for the question, I think. Okay, no, but to speak to it very seriously, I think in the talk here is very much looking at what's happening on farm. And you're asking the question, well, okay, that's what we're doing at farm, but what are we doing as a co-op ourselves? So within Tirlawn, we've signed up to the Science Based Targets Initiative. And by doing so, we've aligned with the goals of the Paris Agreement. And what that basically means is, in terms of our Scope 1 and 2 emissions, the journey we're on between now and 2030 is a 30% reduction in absolute terms in emissions associated with our Scope 1 and 2, and equally a 30% reduction in our Scope 3 in terms of emissions intensity. So you can imagine when you have your targets, the really powerful discussions that's fueling internally, because then you have to ask yourself, what does 30% actually look like, and what's the financing required? But also, what are the policy certainties and uncertainties we have? Okay, as we begin to look at, replacing fossil fuel energy generation with our processing, the discussion around, is it biomethane? When will the biomethane strategy be actually published? And just the certainty, or even the challenge, the lack of certainty, and the financial commitments co-ops like Tirlawn are being asked to make right now, as many businesses are. So we have aligned a trajectory line of sight of where we are heading as a co-op out to 2030. A more firmer policy and regulatory landscape would most definitely be of assistance.
Okay, Nicole, do you want to have a go at, what one, can you pick one policy? It's very difficult to pick one, but...
Well, I don't know if I can pick one, but definitely, as Thomas said, look, we're signed up to the Paris, and obviously we've had our incoming caps as well, and there has to be huge emphasis placed on what have we already signed up for. We already know that we can meet is X percentage of our cap, right? Our 25%, we're missing an extra percentage there. We're hoping on research is going to solve that answer for us in the coming years. And if we're struggling to address them now, it is a big challenge to take on more. So it's putting in the supports to get us to reach them targets as much as possible now. So as you said, focusing on Paris and our new cap. What would be the word? Commitments as well.
Okay, and Dara, there was a question there for you from Antashka. What land use supports, what would they look like to move from what you have now to a totally new paradigm?
Jeez, that's a question for me.
Yeah, I thought so. Have a go anyway.
Yeah, I mean, there's the part of me that, and I think that an increasing number of farmers that fantasize about a life post-cap without cap payments, because I'll give an example. The Acre scheme, the most recent, GLAS, which was the most recent environmental scheme, now being replaced by Acres. I was in GLAS, and again, inspections, penalties, appeals, more penalties, more appeals, nightmare. And so I turned around this time and I said, nah, not doing it. So, schemes are all well and good, but they need to be workable, and farmers need to feel like they're being worked with. Outside of, to me, I go back to those three suggestions that I made, and they're kind of market related in terms of, get everybody to try and, there's 130,000 farms in the country. So, if every farmer could plant up somewhere between 5 and 10% of his land in the corners, that would be a forestry thing, ticked. Re-wetting, need a demo farm. And I think anaerobic digestion, I don't know why it hasn't been rolled out before now. I don't know what the delay is, but it seems like a complete and utter no-brainer in terms of solving a multiple number of issues in terms of renewable heat incentive obligations, in terms of the problems with emissions from the national herd, etc., etc. And there's just one other point there, which was a question, which was, what would you do if you weren't an intensive farmer? Well, probably not a lot in my case, but I just kind of caution on, farmers reinventing themselves. So I regularly, through my work in the media and that, kind of meet people who say, oh, but it'd be wonderful if you should bottle your own milk, and you could do meat boxes, and you could do this, that, and the other. And I actually, I don't know, maybe madly have followed through on some of these recommendations and set up a shop on the farm and an online website and all the rest of it. So we do sell our flowers direct to the public. But I can tell you, it's a total head melt. I mean, farmers are good at farming because they're good at farming, not because they're good at marketing or dealing with the public or, retailing or databases and all this. It's a whole other skill set. So for the point I'm trying to make is for farmers to reinvent themselves, and there's a very good reason why we do what we do. And so the idea that we can all just magic up a new enterprise that is going to leave us with a similar standard of living, I think it's a bit fanciful.
Mm-hmm. Paul, I see you're nodding away. Like, what do you think, what's the future of farming where you can have a good livelihood for your family on the land and meet our environmental obligations? How do you see this playing out?
Yeah, I suppose, look, in all reality, there's going to be many challenges, and we know that, and nobody is suggesting that we do the same things as we did in the 80s and the 90s. There is going to be a move away from certain farming practices that we've been accustomed to. When I was doing my green cert back in the 80s, if I went back there then and looked back and said, okay, very few bits are actually, relevant to where we are today. So there is going to be challenges, yes. We look at the challenge that is in anaerobic digestion, Dara. The reality is that up until recently, it was classed as another form of expansion. So, I would suggest there was a reluctance to engage in it until it became a target from the Commission to say we need a certain percentage of our gases to be from biomethane, to be from renewable source. But that's going to come as another challenge to us because, we are looking at 100,000 hectares of land needed to get the 5.7 terawatts of output. It's a serious challenge to us as an industry. That on top of all of the other commitments that we have with the 50,000 hectares going into tillage ground from grass, the forestry targets that are not going to be met because there's legacy issues there that need to be improved upon, and there's serious legacy issues that need to be worked with because it's very difficult for a farmer to get confidence that you're going to be, that this, if you plant trees on a farm, 35% of that I think is the figure where you need to leave them for the next 100 years. You will only be paid for 20 years in forestry. It's very, very hard for farmers to consider that that's going to be a workable proposal going for them. So they're the challenges. But look, we have a challenge. We have numbers of challenges, but it's designing the policies that are able to bring farmers with you on that journey is the biggest challenge of the day.
Mm-hmm. And how would you like to see that happen?
Better engagement.
What does that mean?
Well, engagement means, and I have been very critical of the nature restoration law as it's, been constructed at this particular moment in time. There's the ability to go back and take a relook at that, to deliver it again with farmers being involved. And as Dara said, describe this. Dara's presentation and when he was talking, we have no knowledge of what actually re-wetting looks like. We have no evaluation of the figures of the amount of land needed. We've been constantly asking the Commission, we're dealing with very historical maps that go back to the Habitats Directive, back 25 years ago nearly. We've been looking for the Department of Agriculture, the National Parks and Wildlife, to come up with figures of how much land is needed. And no one's really able to give us the decent answers. That gives us confidence to tell our farmers if they wish to go on this journey and re-wet and reinstate, that they've got the confidence to do that. Okay. There's also, there's absolutely no money in this either. We're dealing with a historical cap, and it has been suggested that money in order to help re-wetting and reinstating comes from additional cap budgets. The reality is that cap budget has been absolutely annihilated over the last 20 years with, it has never kept pace with inflation. There's been many pulls from that cap budget over the years. And as a result of that, to give farmers money from a depleting budget that is not guaranteed past 2027, to bring them on this journey to 2050, it's an impossible ask.
Fran, just to bring you here in on the nature restoration law, like what are you seeing? Like you gave so many examples there of nature-based solutions, things are actually working. What is in your mind when you're listening to this conversation?
Well, I suppose by listening to the radio, I find it it's disappointing that we can't stay focused on what needs to be done and focus on the actual issue, and then try and work collectively to get to that point. A lot of what I presented there was trying to be clever with what you have. I think with the nature restoration stuff, you're looking at spatial stuff, you're looking at stuff at scale, changing an entire enterprise potentially. Some of the stuff that, the water quality stuff, you're looking at primarily breaking the pathways, so you can be much more targeted and focused, smart buffer zones, that type of stuff. But I do think there's a reality we have to, bridge in terms of that can only do so much. A buffer strip will only intercept so much of the nitrate runoff, or whatever, phosphorus runoff, and if it's nitrates is going to groundwater, you're going to have a different approach there, obviously. And the same with sediment loss. And the challenges in the east, southeast in particular, are different over in the west. So where you're dealing with, very intensive enterprises as opposed to other types, again, we have to kind of think that through. I mean, when I was working down in Dehallow, I remember we were looking at a results-based scheme at the time. The Department of Ag mentioned they're going to have so many power muscle type projects, and we went around, we engaged with farmers and did a lot of public meetings and sat down. And some of the guys said, look, we get it, we like the idea, but we're really busy here. Maybe, the money involved that could be involved would be too small in terms of the time and the fear around bringing in, more regulators into what is already a busy space. So I think we need to kind of make the whole thing much more simple at the ground level, and then at the policy level. I mean, I talked about integrated catchment management, and I'm going to be honest, we don't have always good integrated catchment management in terms of we need to have all the policymakers in the room all the time, consistency and a commitment and targets. And hopefully with the next river-based management plan, that will be much more tightened up. And with the new climate action plans, again, they need to be real, they need to be target specific, and those targets thought through. And I think that's, for me, has been really interesting today to hear the discussions. I mean, because at the end of the day, there's people on the other end that would be affected by those decisions. And there's public money as well that is going in, and we want it to be well spent. Yeah. So they'd be my thoughts on all this.
Okay, thanks. I take a question from online, but I can only see one that's, I think, directed to the Minister, so I don't want to hit anyone with that. But while we're waiting, Dervla, do you want to call out a question?
Yeah, I could call out three actually from online. So one would be for the farmers on stage. So the objective on transitioning towards a more plant-based diet is well known and talked about. But have you seen collaboration with farmers about the land use change that would ensure a just transition as you cut down, as demand for animal products decreases? Then the second question would be for Paul. Paul, in your experience, what is a possible route that would allow the two-way talks between farmers and lawmakers? And then the final question was, it aimed at the department, but I'm going to reroute it to LawPro and the EPA of a need for communication across all tiers, and Transex seems to be one of the main messages from today. Are we seeing plans to create jobs and roles across multiple sectors to fill these communication gaps? We could look at that from the IFA as well. Thanks.
Okay, so the first question's around looking at plant-based diets and how working with farmers we can encourage that. So, Nicole?
I can only really come at it from what I'm seeing on the ground. I don't quite have the policy background in it. But, over the last year we saw record milk prices, which is an indication of an increased demand for products. That's good for us farmers. It ensures that we have necessary income, so we weren't seeing that drop. Now, currently, we are starting to see a price drop. Again, that's due to issues outside of demand as well. Paul will have a better understanding of that. But what I'm seeing is, with my own friends and people of my generation, are the main people making this move towards plant-based diets, right? I'm 25. The majority of people making that transition are between the ages of kind of 15 and 30. And it seems to be a reverse. I have a lot of friends who have gone towards it and come away from it and gone towards it. It's very yo-yo based because they're continually seeing new influencers or new scientific studies, and it's all conflicting science on it. So, like, I don't necessarily have an answer on it. Yes, there are farmers producing products for this market. If we look at like a Flavin's oats and things, they're now producing oat milks. So there is work with farmers to provide that food, but not on a large scale.
Mm-hmm. Thomas, do you want to come in on that from Tirlán perspective?
So maybe if we hear what the analysts say, so Rabo are telling us that by 2030 there's going to be a 20.4 million tonne gap between supply and demand in terms of milk, okay? So I just think the future is very much the flexitarian piece, and it's a bit like this yo-yo. Demand isn't going to collapse per se in a commodity, in my view. I think there's going to be increased demand across existing and new commodities. What we see from customers, so we have customers who are some of the largest purchasers of dairy, but also have their plant and have their non-dairy protein demands as well. So all that's simply happening is their conversations with us are widening to be more than just dairy. Okay? So just to give you a perspective from the marketplace, we're not seeing less of a demand for the product we produce. As a matter of fact, I was saying to someone over the last 18 months, if I hear resilience in the food supply chain from our customers, which is code for we're somewhat concerned around future sourcing and where we can source our product from internationally. So this resilience in the food supply chain, and they link it back to the regenerative agriculture discussion we heard about here around perhaps how could there be some collaboration in the whole regenerative agriculture so as we can increase soil health and enriching soil as a means of supporting that. But I see the categories expanding. I don't get a sense of a shortfall in terms of demand from the marketplace, and our minds, in my slides I would have said we are the largest purchaser of native Irish grains. We have customers who are very interested in that Irish story. I think we've commissioned some LCA analysis around the grains portfolio, so as we can go to the marketplace very credibly, with science to inform messages we're putting forward in sustainability.
Okay, thanks, Thomas. Fran, just on the public engagement and the communication piece, I think from Loughborough's perspective.
Yeah, well, that's something that when we were set up, it was our communities team that was set up first, not the science team. So when we were established back at the beginning of the second cycle, which was 2016, when we were established, the community water officers, who were the animators on the ground, that whole side of the house was put in place first to go out and engage with the various sectors and communities, and then we built up the catchment side of things. At the moment, local authorities are recruiting biodiversity officers, they're recruiting, there's the whole climate action is going on at the moment. It's important all that's integrated and that they're all working together collectively on this, otherwise we could be very, very busy. And that's a concern I would have, is at the moment we've got good structures for the Water Framework Directive. You could replicate those for climate, replicate those for biodiversity. You'll have the same people that go into all these meetings, and all we do is meet. And it's debt by meetings, and I find it, it's difficult. We have a lot of steering group meetings, whatever. We need time to just do stuff and get stuff going. And in the public sector, to try and get projects off the ground, you have to go through the whole procurement stuff. That's exhausting in terms of time. So if you don't have the staff and the time, you can't focus on problem solve. And a lot of this is me thinking here, a lot of what I'm hearing is to figure out some of the issues, we need space and time to be creatively thinking and working stuff through. Okay. So at the moment, just related to this, is that on the urban side, Engineers Ireland are hosting, just finished a webinar today with ourselves and with the department. So I just got the figures in there, there was just under 500 practitioners online. So these would be professional bodies, the Irish Planning Institute, the landscape architects, right across the space, people who will be involved in putting in green roofs, that type of stuff, the active travel people, the URDF, the RDF, all that stuff is going on at the moment. And what the Engineers Ireland want to do now is move forward and develop training, multidisciplinary training for everybody to work collectively, because that's not happening at the moment.
Okay. Darragh, the role of the media in this, and sometimes you hear the media are just polarising this situation even more than it needs to be. Like, what do you think of that? Or do you think there's a role for the media in bringing more balance to the discussion?
It depends who I'm talking to. So farmers will regularly collar me and say, oh, here's the ground's after going to hell, there's no farming on it. And I'm kind of going, well, it's got a fair bit of farming, and did you ever consider for a second that, 90% of the audience is actually non-farming, so we have to make it, a program for non-farmers and about farming? And they kind of go, oh yeah, okay. And then, on the other side of the fence, it's like, well, you're always pitting environmentalists against farmers or whatever. And of course, as a newspaper editor, a story is not, environmental group and farm group have a really great weekend together and they had a lovely time. That's not news. Mm-hmm. News is environmental group storm out of meeting with farm leaders, right? So, it's not necessarily the job we would like, fair and balanced reporting, but it's not necessarily, you're not going to find that the media is going to always, give a terribly balanced view, because at the end of the day they have to sell newspapers or get eyeballs. So I think we need to be realistic about what we expect from media. Yeah. So, it's a double-edged sword.
Yeah, fair enough. And we as consumers maybe drive that as well.
Absolutely.
So the final question then, before we wrap it up, Paul, which is, it's the second time, because I've kind of asked, the engagement piece is so strong. What would you like to see? What would you love to see in terms of where you want that two-way conversation?
Okay.
Because the IFA are good at getting out and talking, so and telling us the way it is from their perspective. Yeah. And being at events like this, and we need that. But what else would you like to see happen?
Okay, how long have I got? I suppose
not that long.
Really, I suppose. I suppose really the point is that yes. Look, last night I was in Sligo talking to a group of farmers over there. I was in Westmeath last week. I was in Tullamore the week before. Every week I'm meeting a series of farmers. And they're all nervous and they're all worried about what is the future going to bring them. And look, and we do know, and we've heard the story, like a third of farmers are over, should be retired. And that is a challenge. Mm. How do we bring all of that? Look, in order to bring a new generation of farmers into the business, in order to give the reassurances that farmers who are in the business, people like me that are going to have to put children through college over the next 10 or 15 years, in order for me to be able to farm, I need confidence that I am going to be able to make a living out of what I'm doing. That is the core thing. It's the job of the IFA, the biggest farm organisation in the country. We deal with everything from agriculture to horticulture to all of the other parts of farming. We're the one organisation, so when I'm going to a meeting, I'm listening to poultry farmers, big farmers, sheep farmers, tillage, the whole spectrum of agriculture. And they've all got their own individual challenges and concerns. But all the biggest concerns they have is that the expectation of them is not clearly defined. And as I say, this is what the IFA can do. We can be that lever in the middle. It is up to the Commission and our own government and our government departments and the semi-states and bodies like the EPA to work with you and for you to bring farmers on that journey. But we can't bring farmers on a journey that's to a dead end. There has to be hope. We can't fill a vacuum that could potentially be created under things like some of the targets that we have for LULUCF, particularly re-wetting and reinstating, if we're offering them no alternative to farm.
Yeah. Okay.
So therefore, this is where the conversation needs. Clearly define what things like re-wetting and reinstating are. What does this look like? How can farmers farm as a result of these measures that are going to be expected of them? Now, I will defend any farmer's right to re-wet their land if that's what they wish, but they need to know what they're doing. Mm-hmm. It needs to be clearly defined of the expectations of the states and the Commission in order to say, this is what we expect of you and this is how you will be rewarded.
Okay.
But at the moment, there just hasn't been a good, clear pathway of communication in order for myself and the IFA to be able to reassure our farmers that you will be supported on this journey.
Okay. So, Dara, final word.
A quick
point. I thought it was quite interesting that it was difficult to get farmers to come here and speak to this audience today.
Weather's too good.
Well, I was told they were too busy.
And so that is all cotton aside. You know, any farmer, the IFA organises a meeting, and if the weather is good, they get a poor attendance because they're busy and they're working 10, 12, 14-hour days. But I think, you know, if the EPA wants to hear more about the farmer side of things, maybe the EPA needs to get out there and put its arm around farmers, not, you know, say we love you and we think you're all great fellas, but to say we are interested in hearing from you and not just relying on the IFA. Obviously the IFA is the largest group of farmers in the country, but, you know, be seen by farmers to be going out there and be mixing with them and engaging with them so that they're not in fear. I mean, there is this thing out there amongst farmers, rightly or wrongly, that they feel like they've been branded as environmental terrorists. Every time they put a cluster on a cow, start a tractor, put a plough into a field, that they're releasing carbon into the atmosphere.
Very good. Okay, well look, we're going to wrap it up at this point. It's, you know, this conference I think has been a great success. I want to say thank you, first of all, to all of the speakers on this panel. So if you could just give a round of applause for our speakers. I'm down on the agenda to make closing remarks. I'm not going to go through a summary of the whole day because I know we've had a long day, and I think there's no need really to do that. We've been hugely engaging discussions right throughout, from the national, the Minister, international perspective, Laura at the beginning. We had climate science from our LULUCF inventories through into climate science, and now the more practical perspectives that we've had in this discussion here this afternoon. It's not just about the EPA, this conference, you know, it's about bringing all of the stakeholders together and to start this discussion and this two-way conversation about land use. So I hope that we've been able to start that today, that you've learned something. I've certainly learned a lot, and look forward to seeing you all next year for sure when we have our next climate conference. So thank you very much.